There's too many of them. Let's run for the door. We're almost there. Okay, we'll brace the door just in case, but I think we're clear.
I can check off my exercise for today. Perhaps we should have been quieter in there. Sebastian wouldn't have uttered a single word that whole time.
Well, that wouldn't have been any fun.
And that's the fourth or fifth reason I brought you along. A sense of humor when others would drown in sorrow.
I thought it was because so you could check me out as I ran.
Well, at least you're not as flat as Sebastian in that department. Now, we got a good walk to Camp Venture ahead of us.
We could stop by Dabney homestead, a small farm just over. You can almost see the barn. There were actually some little crops there last I was here about 2 months ago.
Not a bad idea, actually. Lets us conserve our rations. Check to see if it's suitable as a fallback location.
Word through the grapevine is you made a steady profit last month, maybe more so than anybody else. You would have thought you were the sole event from gambling being the authority head.
Capital for my future ventures. Investments in the future for us of all. And I had no control over the fight outcomes themselves. I'm really called it when one combatant was unconscious and thus unable to continue.
If I recall, Pace 1, steady caravans to about 24 locations and the larger camps. Purified water created a mess. Some fresh food. Heavy discounts to encourage the future customer base.
Some basic medical care as well. And to keep people alive at least. Some reinforced educational training as well. People have probably forgotten some of what we taught them in the vault.
One adult human being needs approximately 1 gallon of water a day. 100 gallons would weigh approximately 830 pounds, enough for at least 2, maybe 3 Bremen to carry.
Ideally, I'd like to come with a more artificial solution. A single small truck could carry that much, or a sizable wagon packed by a team of 60 at Bremen. I'd like to eventually furnish a single caravan group that could carry 2 to 3 tons of supplies. If I got more cooperation from others, we could even automate the process and keep losses to a minimum.
I believe the test run of about, 500, 600 pounds last month's gathering went well enough, all the way to almost Fleet Foods.
It was satisfactory but far from a qualified success. A real test would be at least a singleton with enough armaments to protect it in more adverse conditions.
Do you think we'll be the first to deliver a series of caravans and a thriving academy?
I strongly suspect that has already been done and probably in operation for decades at this point, if the Brotherhood of Steel in California is any indication. And while conditions here are adverse, I imagine they are much worse in Southern California, Washington, D.C., or other first strike locations.
It's strange to think there are thousands, maybe millions, of survivors across the country, dealing with things that make our merry band of vault dwellers look like a Sunday picnic.
The first vaults, as if I recall correctly, would have opened at least 5 years ago. Maybe earlier. At least some of them had to have survived. Civilization will rebuild itself in time.
But how soon before we start destroying it again? The ecological damage we did went back decades, even centuries, before the bombs actually fell.
It seems we are approaching the farm. Be on the lookout for it.
Drum crawlers. Luckily, they haven't spotted us yet. 3 of them, too much for us to handle. I guess we'll just backtrack.
Luckily, I packed some special surprises for just this use case.
I don't think a couple of frag grenades is gonna cut it this time.
I put some more powerful explosives using the power of Nuka-Cola. Nearly 3 times as powerful. Haven't gotten a chance to test it out in live combat yet.
I guess this is good of a time. How about we toss them at opposite ends, try and cover a wider radius.
You take the right, I'll take the left. We got good cover behind this big hay bale. We got one of them. I guess we'll have to finish them off the old-fashioned way. I think we're clear.
And more importantly, we have dinner. About 10 more minutes and we'll have some grilled fuck crawler stew, courtesy of yours truly.
And I'm ready with the antibiotics.
Nice to see the barn roof is mostly intact, enough for some basic shelter anyway. I trust the house remains even less thaw.
The growth rate on those vines over there is remarkable. Not merely a product of background radiation.
I remember you had some thoughts on that just before we took on that queen. Some experiment run them, or just some silly chaos theory?
Chaos theory is hardly a flight of fancy. The most complex systems may be influenced by the tiniest of things in an order of magnitude. The growth and diversity of life in what we now call the mire was something much larger. I vaguely remember some discussion on some of the more advanced prototypes of the GAC.
The Garden of Creation kit. Apparently they overlooked Vault 76 when they handed them out. Could have given us a nice jump start on supplying fresh and healthy food.
Dr. Brown obviously realized we did not need one.
And how did he arrive at that stunning conclusion?
Because Vault 76 was given something infinitely more important. Me.
I'm no longer even remotely shocked or surprised by the depths of your arrogance.
Totally justified. I possess all the knowledge and means of a GAC. Already a few months later, I'm on the verge of providing clean water. A few months. A healthy supply of fresh food.
Did you personally know him, Dr. Brown?
I met him several times at a young age. He saw potential in me, but then again, most people did. And I'll admit being a great admirer of his. He was already a great genius in Germany before I came along. The government imported him to head up programs with Vault-Tec. Provide America with an even greater chance of survival.
Possibly also the psychopath who put together these vault experiments. I can only imagine some of others being for worse than ours.
As the saying goes, you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. Experiments had to be run to achieve the most desirable outcome.
I can't see how you can be so complacent about our experiment. You were an unwitting part of it as well. Or did the great Maxwell know it was an experiment when he walked through the door?
As I have said many times in the past, I didn't know it was an experiment. In the beginning, I realized it might have been one after the first decade or so. It confused to me why such a young candidate was chosen to be an overseer of a seemingly important vault. I believed the experiment was to see how an inexperienced administrator would handle the vault and what she would learn from the experience.
And yet you told nobody. How did it make you feel to realize we were an experiment? Angry, wounded, a hefty blow to your vanity to think you were just
Proud. That is how I felt. Proud and so full of joy to be part of something greater than myself. I wasn't sure if my assignment was a sign of praise or a punishment. I wasn't even assigned to the senior staff, at least not initially. But when I realized that I had been chosen to help and guide such a young leader, to oversee such potential, lest it be wasted, I felt differently from that day onward. It wasn't about being better. I already was. It wasn't about that. It was about becoming a teacher. A mentor. My glory would be in how we turned out when Vault-Tec saw us after 25 years.
Said deluded Mac. Vault-Tec is gone. A bunch of skeletons in lab cuts in forgotten structures overground with things in town.
We are all members of Vault-Tec, lest you forget the contract you signed, and if other vaults survived. Hundreds, thousands of surviving Vault-Tec members. Perhaps even as old as he is, Dr. Braun survived. Somewhere. And one day, we may transmit our findings and work from West Virginia. And perhaps, just maybe, he'll see it in his last few days.
But the experiment wasn't about you. Well, not you personally, all of us. To see if we'd follow or would be mother into the Westlands and do her bidding of a fashion.
And it was a success. But it need not be the only experiment that was run. I consider our lack of a gag to be yet another run. Can the great Dr. Maxwell Marconi breathe the life back into West Virginia with just his brain and his chewing?
You wouldn't have gotten far without the rest of us. So more like 60 or 80 hands, a creature worthy of a vet in West Tech.
A side note, but nobody ever asked Einstein about his lab assistants. There were a limited number of gags, but more advanced versions were being worked on up until we lost contact with the outside world.
They could do more than the standard ones, I assume?
Early prototypes just increased their effectiveness, but more advanced ones. Actual terraforming from a single device. Some of the effects I've seen in the mire mirror some of those effects. Hardly anyway.
It almost sounds like you are describing a bomb's detonation, but the cold fusion generator I read about couldn't explode in such a way, I don't think.
You were correct, those couldn't. But some of the advanced prototype descents. In theory, an uncontrolled event could happen. and under certain circumstances could be a level 5 or even a level 6 nuclear event.
You think that's what happened here? Could one of the missiles ever evolve with that kind of gag?
I doubt it happened on that day. Some of the notes I have read indicated later, even maybe a year or more, radioactive clouds. I thought it was just a side effect of an ultra-sight pocket, but now I'm not so sure. Alice, I wasn't privy to information about the other vaults in Uri, nor which ones received gags, standard or advanced.
Sounds like they didn't vote Maxwell Marconi as much as he thinks they should have.
I'm afraid it was the nature of the beast. Only the most senior leaders of Vault Tech had all the pieces. Most of what I worked on, I was only given just enough information to provide valuable insight. Nothing more.
Do you think if we recovered such a device, we could make it work for us?
Possibly. If one was found intact, we could transform the worst soil into rich farmland. The Toxic Valley. The Ash Heap. As verdant as the lands around Vault 76.
I think I'll hit the hay. What's left of it anyway? One last question. If you create the Garden of Eden, will you be Eve or the snake?